a child of 1900. The untold story behind America's transformation at the dawn of a new century. On a cold winter morning in January 1900, a child was born in a modest wooden home somewhere in the expanding heartland of the United States. The world he entered was vastly different from the one we know today, a land of horse-drawn carriages, oil lamps, and handwritten letters. America stood on the edge of transformation, though few could yet see how profound that change would be. This child, whom we will call Thomas, was born into a country still finding its modern identity. The echoes of the 19th century lingered. Industrialization had begun reshaping cities, but rural life still defined much of the nation. Electricity was a luxury, automobiles were rare curiosities, and the idea of flight was still new and uncertain. Childhood in a changing nation, Thomas grew up witnessing the quiet but powerful shift from an agrarian society to an industrial powerhouse. As a young boy, he watched workers lay railroad tracks that stretched endlessly across the land, connecting distant towns and opening new opportunities. He saw factories rise, their smokestacks becoming symbols of progress and sometimes hardship. Education became his gateway to understanding this changing world. Public schools were expanding, and literacy rates were rising. Thomas learned not only reading and arithmetic, but also the ideals of innovation and ambition that defined the American spirit of the early 20th century. Witness to innovation and crisis. By the time Thomas reached his teenage years, America was accelerating into modernity. The invention of the automobile transformed how people traveled, while the telephone brought voices across distances once thought impossible. But progress came with challenges. In 1914, the world was thrown into turmoil with the outbreak of a global conflict. Though far from the battlefields, America would soon be drawn into the war. Thomas, now a young man, witnessed the mobilization of troops and the shift in industry toward wartime production. The nation united in purpose, and this experience left a lasting mark on his generation. Soon after, another crisis struck, the devastating influenza pandemic of 1918. Communities were shaken, and families mourned. Thomas saw firsthand how fragile life could be, even in an age of advancement. The Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression, the 1920s, brought a wave of optimism. Cities buzzed with energy, jazz music filled the air, and new technologies, like radios and motion pictures, connected people in ways never before imagined. Thomas, now an adult, found work in a growing urban center, becoming part of the workforce driving America's prosperity. Yet this era of excitement came to a sudden halt with the stock market crash of 1929. The Great Depression reshaped the nation's economy and tested its resilience. Jobs disappeared, banks failed, and uncertainty spread across every corner of society. Thomas endured these hardships, adapting as millions of Americans did. He took on whatever work he could find, embodying the perseverance that defined his generation. War and the rise of modern America. As the world once again descended into conflict in the 1940s, Thomas was no longer a young man, but he contributed in other ways. He worked in factories supporting the war effort, helping produce the machinery that would shape global events. This period marked a turning point for America. The country emerged from the war stronger, more unified, and positioned as a global leader. Thomas saw cities expand, suburbs grow, and new industries flourish, a lifetime of transformations. By the time Thomas reached old age, the world had changed beyond recognition. He had been born into a century of simplicity and witnessed the rise of airplanes, television, and eventually even space exploration. He saw America evolve from a developing nation into a modern superpower. More importantly, Thomas represented something larger than himself. He was part of a generation that lived through and contributed to some of the most significant transformations in history. From industrial growth to global conflict, from economic collapse to technological revolution, his life mirrored the story of America itself. Asterisk legacy of the child of 1900. Though Thomas was not a famous figure recorded in textbooks, his story is far from insignificant. It is the story of millions, ordinary individuals whose resilience, labor, and adaptability shaped the nation's path. The child of 1900 was not just one person, but a symbol of a generation that bridged two worlds, the old and the modern. Their legacy lives on in the society we know today, a reminder that history is not only made by great leaders, but also by everyday people who endure, adapt, and quietly change the course of a nation.